Thank you for joining our conversation about global fact checking, organized by the Society of Professional Journalists International Community. My name is Jeff South, and I'll be moderating this discussion. I'm a retired journalist and journalism professor in Richmond, Virginia, USA. Before we start our discussion, there are a few housekeeping items we'd like to do. The format of this session is simple. The guests and I will have a conversation. If along the way in this discussion you have a question for our guests, please use the Q&A function on Zoom. I will be sure to work your questions in as we go along. Please keep the chat box clear. The International Community Co-Chair, Dan Kubisky, will be using the chat box to post links and additional information related to today's discussion. This talk is being recorded and will be placed in the International Community's YouTube channel. Dan has posted the link for that in the chat box. And now I would like to introduce our guests. Doya Batar is the founder of the Nest Center for Journalism Innovation and Development in Mongolia. One of Nest's projects is the Mongolian Fact-Checking Center. In a few minutes, we will ask Doya to tell us about that. She lives and works in Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia, the coldest national capital on Earth, where temperatures can drop to 40 degrees below zero, the point where Celsius and Fahrenheit meet. So no matter how cold it may be where you are now, don't complain. I had the honor of working with Doya on a Fulbright project a few years ago, and I serve on the Nest Center's advisory board. Our other expert guest is Angie Holan, director of the International Fact-Checking Network. It's a project of the Poynter Institute, the renowned journalism think tank in St. Petersburg, Florida. Warmer weather than Mongolia, but with hurricanes. The International Fact-Checking Network, which has been nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize, is just one of many resources that Poynter provides for both journalists and non-journalists alike. So let's start by having our guests tell us a little bit about themselves and their involvement in fact-checking. Doya, can you go first, please?
Great. Thank you, Jeff, for the introduction, and thanks, Dan, for this opportunity. And it's so great to be back and with Angie, and it's the timing couldn't be better, I would say. So Nest Center for Journalism Innovation and Development is a local NGO located in Mongolia where we work to basically make the information ecosystem a little bit more friendly and make it easier for journalists and media organizations to exist and keep doing the great journalism that they do. So we do that in two ways. The first is by helping media organizations establish sustainable business models while serving their audience. And the second area in which we work is the Mongolian Fact Checking Center. So while we support the business aspect of the media organizations, we also saw a big gap in the quality of journalism and the fact-checking practices in the newsrooms existing in Mongolia. That's why we started with the Mongolian Fact-Checking Center because that was something that we could do right away in 2020. And both MFCC and Nest are turning 5 years this year. So we're a rather young organization, but we're hoping that the impacts that we create in the local media ecosystem is long living. And we're basically uh, expanding as an organization and trying to increase our impact in the local community.
Wow. Um, Angie, how about you? Tell us a little bit about your organization as well.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And it's really great to be here with Julia, whose work I admire so much. The International Fact-Checking Network started about 10 years ago. In 2014, we had a meeting of fact checkers from around the world. There were about 35 of us, fact checkers from the United States, from the United Kingdom, from India, from Latin America, from Africa, from Asia. And we decided we wanted to keep meeting and form a group to support and promote fact checking around the world. And that's how the International Fact Checking Network was born. Among our activities are we host a Global Fact, which is an annual convening of the world's fact checkers. Last summer, we were in Sarajevo. This summer, we'll be in Rio de Janeiro. We get together and we talk about the best practices in fact checking. We have a code of principles that fact checkers sign up for that establishes those standards and they're required to meet them. So we talk about that. We talk about tech policy and social media platforms and basically this global environment where we need so much work to promote information integrity. And we see fact checking as a key part of that. The IFCN, as we call ourselves, we also have a major grant program called the Global Fact Check Fund, where we offer grants to organizations, mostly our verified signatories, to study new projects and promote new initiatives in fact checking so that the whole community can learn from it.
Interesting. What an impact. So, as noted earlier, we want to make this program a conversation, not a lecture. So please enter your questions and suggestions for discussion topics in the Q&A box on Zoom. Now, a few weeks ago, someone handed us an issue to talk about. That person's name was, let me check my notes, Mark Zuckerberg. Mr. Zuckerberg announced that his company, Meta, was essentially ending its fact-checking program for Facebook and its other platforms because he claimed fact-checking has resulted in censorship. Angie, what's your reaction to that decision?
Just mostly disappointment, and I hope Meta will change their mind. I don't expect them to in the short term. But this was a strong program that brought fact-checking journalism to Facebook, Instagram, Threads. And what it did was it allowed fact checkers to identify trending content, especially content that was going viral and had been identified as likely false. Identified either through users telling Facebook that it was false or through Facebook's own algorithms surfacing it. The fact checkers would look at the content and put labels onto the content if it was found to be false. Labels that said things like independent fact checkers have found this content to be inaccurate. Are you sure you want to see it? And then people could click through and see it. Meta ran the program. Meta established all the labels. It was part of Meta's overall trust and safety program, and it operated alongside what Meta called its community standards. And
Hmm,
those were separate standards that had to do with hate speech, illegal content, harmful content. The program was launched in uh, 2016, at the very end of 2016, and then it grew to 90 different countries around the world and about 100 fact-checking partners. And it's been a major source of financial sustainability for these fact-checking organizations. So to see it go away is it's a blow to the financial sustainability of fact checking in general. And then some of Mark Zuckerberg's specific statements about fact checkers, especially the fact checkers in the United States, that they were biased. Um, it stung. I mean, I know there's no two ways about it. We feel like we were good partners to Meta through this program, and we're sorry to see it going away. But the people I worry most about are the ordinary, everyday people who are just going on Facebook to get information about their lives, to interact with their friends and family, who don't want to see a bunch of hoaxes, scams, and conspiracy theories. And we don't know what the future is going to look like. But I do think it's going to be fewer fact check reports published and fewer fact checkers working in in the US. And then the changes may roll out to the rest of the world.
interesting. Doya, how will Meta's decision affect the Mongolian fact-checking center and Nest?
Well, at this point, we have no indication that we will be directly affected by this decision, but we have already been affected by that evil sentence that fact checkers are biased because it also plays out to the reputation that we have worked so hard to build in the past. Fact checking is quite a new practice in Mongolia, and we have been trying to raise awareness on the importance of fact checking, recognizing mis and disinformation on social media, and how to basically do your own fact checks. And that's something that we've been working so hard to build. And now somebody comes out and says fact checkers are biased and it's a form of censor, what does it do to the overall reputation of the fact checking? So, in terms of the program, we have no indication how we will be directly affected by this. We have our contract until the end of this year. Um, we can never be too sure how that's going to stay that way, but we're hopeful that the program will stay. So there were two things we're getting out of this program. More technically. So first one is funding. The second one is access to the fact-checking tool. So something that cannot be replaced is the fact-checking tool. In terms of the funding, however important that is, it can be replaced. Probably not with kind of in the same amounts, but it can be replaced. Right now, we are implementing. Actually, we're starting a membership program where we're targeting individual citizens to be part of our members under actually the program that Angie just mentioned, the Global Fact Check Fund, the Engage grant program, as an IFCN signatory. And we're very hopeful that that can play an important role in substituting the funding side of the Meta's partnership with us. But the fact checking tool is an invaluable resource to us. We've been fact checking for 2 years until we joined the Meta's third party fact checking program. And if we look at the amount of impact we had, the number of people we reached with our fact checks before and after the program, it's very different. And according to a study that we did on our audience, 75% treat Facebook as their main information or news actually source in Mongolia. So for them, since Facebook in its entirety is such an important platform and source, being able to directly work with the source itself and basically label the misinformation as false and add more context to people who want to read more. I mean, that's invaluable. Rather than just having your own Facebook page, your own website, and doing contents that explain the fact checks, the number of people you can reach with that is very different. Another thing that Mark Zuckerberg noted was overall their content moderation is going to be different. I think we can use X as an indication as to how that goes, right? If you look at the user experience of X users prior to and after the change in policy, I mean, it's just X is just a more um, chaotic environment, and people have been deciding to leave X just because it's not a good place to be in anymore. So I hope Facebook will not be something like that anymore. And I'm mentioning mostly Facebook because that's really the most used platform in Mongolia, and it is kind of our information ecosystem now. I
Yeah.
think I can say
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
So we have a question from an esteemed journalist and journalism trainer, Linda Austin, who's watching this webinar. And it picks up on the thread that you had just mentioned, Doya, um, about what might replace a, a professional fact-checking system like the Mongolian fact-checking center has. And so Linda asks, how effective is crowdsourcing as a way to flag false information on social platforms? How does it compare to professional fact-checking? Um, uh,
Yeah, I would
yeah,
love to jump in there because we've been
please.
studying how it works on X. Um, and it's not that community notes or as X calls crowdsourcing community notes, it's not that it's necessarily a bad system, but it has limitations. It has serious limitations. We don't think the IFCN does not think that crowdsourcing and professional fact checking should be mutually exclusive. We should use these methods together
Hmm.
and study them. There's good evidence that shows that people do appreciate recommendations that are community based. But we've also seen that crowdsourced fact checking has some problems on timely response. So the system as it's constructed on X depends on volunteers posting information, and then people across the political spectrum widely agreeing upon it. Well, in the United States, there's so much polarization that you
Yeah.
often can't get widespread agreement, even on factual matters. So a very small percentage of these notes end up being surfaced to the whole user community. So the timeliness is a big problem. The requirement for consensus across political views is a big problem. And then another big problem is that these programs don't tend to be really great at handling issues of complexity and nuance. So
Mhm.
it's really good at saying something like, this photo is taken out of context. This photo claims to be from the Los Angeles fires of 2025. It's actually from fires in a different part of the state in a different year. Like crowdsourcing can be really good for that kind of thing. But if you're dealing with claims about causes and conditions and policy um, blame, political blame, those are much more challenging for a crowdsourcing system. Um, I can tell you the IFCN intends to be studying this even more intensively. If the meta program is going away, we're going to lose fact checkers, but like our professional attention is going to turn to other programs, and we're going to look very closely at things like community notes. Meta has said they intend to build out a community notes system in the US and then roll it out around the world. So we're going to be watching that to see what happens because our mission is to promote information integrity. We believe fact checking is a great way to do it, and fact checking can be applied through different programs in multiple circumstances.
Interesting.
Hi,
Um,
Linda. Thank you for the question. So I think I can add some perspective from
yeah.
a country that has quite a low media literacy and digital literacy as well. For a country like Mongolia, I honestly don't think a system like community notes would work well. First of all, the overall media literacy stands at around 30%, and that's a number from about 30% of the whole population think their media literacy is somewhat okay. And that's a number from, I think, 4 years ago. And we don't necessarily study that or measure that on an annual basis. So it's a sad story, but it's quite low. And if we look at the fact checks that we did in the past, actually just in 2024, we did a toxicity analysis on all the contents that we fact checked, and only 16% of all the contents we fact checked had low toxicity rate. So that would be contents like debunking false images or images that are taken out of the context and things like that. And more than 80% are medium to high toxicity. So those are the more complex contents. That would I mean, if we take it into perspective and apply it to what Angie said, community notes could probably work with 16% of our annual fact checks, but not the 84% of it. On top of that, a system like that can be rigged. And we also do a lot of research on how the information ecosystem is being manipulated. And we actually have identified at least four different kind of mobs or groups that push certain agendas, whether it's political, whether it's outside of Mongolia. I mean, we have two very powerful neighbors. So those those accounts, they are very powerful, and they can come in and basically define the story as they are. And I can't help but mention the importance of the IFCN's Code of Principles. It's a very important system, and what we do, we recognize that this is very sensitive and it's very important, and we kind of take this responsibility very seriously. And the IFCN Code of Principles is a very good mechanism to basically kind of keep us in our place while doing this important work. And when we're using the community notes and when we're doing crowdsourcing, individuals are not subject to such principles and they can do whatever they do. I mean, I kind of feel like the community notes program, although more complex it is, it's no different than a comment, I would say, under a post. So it is important to have like different opinions, different perspectives, but I don't really think this is like part of a fact checking, but it can be a system that complements fact checking or maybe um, what's the word, multiplies the impact of fact checking as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're interested in exploring ways that like fact checkers can be part of a community notes program and maybe accelerate it in some way or
Yeah.
but like more research is needed uh for certain and I did want to just thank Duya for bringing up the code of principles because I just have to respond a little bit more to what Zuckerberg said in that
Mhm.
we're biased because we set up this code of principles to emphasize transparency and nonpartisanship. So uh, so to just say without evidence that we're biased, well, we have a really detailed system to working toward ensuring that fact checkers are not biased. They don't take policy positions. They don't take political positions. They try to fact check the spectrum equally. The other claim that he made that I really want to respond to is that fact checking is censorship. Fact checkers
Mhm.
are not practicing censorship. We believe strongly in press freedom and, in fact, or freedom of expression because we need it for press freedom. We need to be able to investigate freely, to interview experts without interference, to be able to look at unpopular ideas and explore them in full. Um, so I do think this decision came out in a highly political context where some people just don't want their political viewpoint to be fact checked or rebutted or contradicted. And I hope that this is of the political moment and that the political winds will shift. Because I think what happens, just like Dewey said, like when people go online, they don't want to be confronted with scams, hoaxes, conspiracy theories. I mean, surveys show most ordinary people are in favor of moderation. They don't want to have to go into this online landscape where they have to fact check everything for themselves and research everything for themselves. Most people don't want that. The people who are saying that that's a good idea are highly politically motivated and trying to gain and wield political power.
Mhm. Angie, can you talk a little bit about applying those principles? The kinds of rigor that professional fact checkers bring to um, using to taking journalism, a discipline of verification,
Right?
and scrutinizing things that appear to be suspect.
Mhm.
What does that, I guess from a consumer standpoint, what does that look like?
Yeah, and it's a real emphasis on primary sources.
Hmm.
So every claim that is fact checked is a little bit different and has a different set of evidence that would support it or debunk it or lead you to the conclusion that it's uncertain or not knowable. I mean, I'm always trying to remind people like fact checking can't answer every question. What it does is says, here's the best possible evidence, and here's our most reasonable conclusion. It's not godlike or perfect. I've heard people this week say, "Oh, fact checkers are arrogant." We don't intend to be arrogant. We actually try to have some humility about the limits of human knowledge. But there's evidence and then there's lack of evidence. So, again, primary sources, documentation, scientific study, rational argument, all of those things are sources that fact checkers will consult for any particular topic. And then when we get into like the everyday practice of accuracy, nonpartisanship, and transparency. Like we're asking these fact-checking organizations to put on their website who their staff is, how they're funded, ways they can be
Hmm.
contacted, a corrections policy, evidence that they make corrections. I mean, people will really criticize fact checkers publicly when they have to make corrections, but I think the corrections are part of being human and part of the process and actually show credibility. So, so those are some of the hallmarks of fact checking, and we ask the fact checking organizations to show that they're checking across the spectrum. Not that, half of Team Red got half right and half wrong, and so did Team Blue,
Hmm.
and that shows they're not biased. No, but to show that they're fact checking them in the same way to the same standards of evidence. That's the lack of bias that we're talking about when we talk about fact checking journalism.
Hmm. Doya, can you give us some examples of fact checks that really made a difference to the people of Mongolia, and maybe fact checks that otherwise would have that you think might have been missed had this the scrutiny been left to a community notes sort of protocol?
Yeah, to answer that, I think I should compare our work between 2020 and 2022 and work since then. Overall, the number of people we reached with our fact checks are basically very, very different. And also, the fact checking tool allows us to basically see what stories or what posts are trending and need more attention more urgently. So it basically fastens or really makes our whole process to identify disinformation that's going around there easier to identify and find. Um, Prior to that, the disinformation we could find on, namely Facebook platform, were limited to our own algorithms, our own bubbles, and within our own friends circles. We did encourage people to send to us what they see in their social media platforms, so to basically go out of our bubbles and see other people's feedbacks. It did help, but it wasn't as fast. So if we, I think the number of disinformation we were able to find within a month is 5 times more now compared to the days before the fact-checking tool was provided to us. So it's as a matter of fact, it's 8 compared to like 40, and we struggled with 8 fact checks. We struggled to find it really. We really had to go out and look for that. And to a certain extent, we were like wondering, aren't there any misinformation there? Actually, like if not, then like it's not that would mean what we're doing is not really needed. But then when we got the fact checking tool, it just really opened our eyes to like what's actually happening in the Mongolian social media, what's happening outside of our own bubbles, and like what kind of information people that we don't know are actually using. So it's really important for us to understand that. Just to give some of the examples is, um, I mean, recently, last starting from January 11th, last Saturday, there's been a protest in Mongolia boycotting the air pollution. And there's been a slew of contents and posts around Facebook that's saying that this protest is staged and people who are out there protesting are not really like organically doing that. They're basically paid to do that. So these kind of narratives come out every time when there's a protest. And we think that's very dangerous because it um, basically denies the democratic principles and denies those people's will to express their opinions, express their frustration in a way that's legally allowed. So we're also watching that a lot. Another example that had a lot of negative impacts because fact checking didn't exist 10 years ago in Mongolia is a content related to vaccination of the human papilloma virus,
Mhm.
the virus that causes cervical cancer. So there was a nationwide vaccination campaign that started more than 10 years ago in Mongolia, but there was a lot of disinformation saying that this causes like permanent infertility, and a lot of people were against the vaccination, and actually the government stopped the vaccination because of that. And data now shows that 4,000 people died of 4,000 women died because of cervical cancer since that vaccination had stopped. And now, starting from November 25th last year, they restarted this. And during the process, we worked really hard to identify disinformation that were doing the same thing as in 10 years ago, and we work together. And then we have been kind of influencing in our own small areas of influence as well, within our staff, with the help of our community, people who read us and support us on social media and things like that. And we have been creating a lot of impact. So now the vaccination is going. So I think that's a good kind of comparison between when there's no fact checking and there's an important social issue, and when there is fact checking, and when we are able to identify to a certain extent where those disinformation are coming from, and see the channels that are basically spreading that information further.
Interesting.
Mm.
Angie, could you chime in a little bit about the real world impact of misinformation and disinformation online, the kinds of falsehoods that are
Sure.
combated by the fact-checking network?
Sure. I do. It's interesting when Duya was talking about Mongolia. Like a lot of that resonates with the experience of audiences in the US, which is a much
Mhm.
bigger market. There was a lot of fact checking of false cures during COVID. So there was claims that vitamin C could cure COVID or warm water. I mean, just bizarre claims and that, could deter people from seeking evidence-based treatment. Certainly, the vaccines, there have been several studies that showed that people who were subject to vaccine misinformation had lower rates of taking up the vaccine, and that resulted in more deaths from COVID. I mean, there's anecdotal evidence and survey evidence to show
Mhm.
that. More recently, fact checkers in the US have debunked claims following natural disasters, like the hurricanes that struck North Carolina. There was all this misinformation saying that there was no aid available to people who had their homes
Mhm.
destroyed. That was not true. I mean, like that one, I have to say, like, just from an ethical standpoint, really leaves you scratching your head. Why would you spread misinformation denying people aid that was available and that they were entitled to? But it seemed to be for political reasons to
Yeah.
stoke distrust in the federal government. There have also been a lot of claims around elections and election interference. And, for all the charges that fact checkers are biased, they've done many fact checks to debunk false claims against um, Donald Trump after the assassination attempts. There were all sorts of false claims that it was staged, that it wasn't real, that Trump had planned it himself, and independent, nonpartisan fact checkers debunked all of those
Mhm.
claims.
Interesting. Um, let's see. Again, if listeners and viewers have questions, please pop them into the Q&A box there.
Can I
Um,
raise
yeah.
something? Do you mention this? And I just wanted to expand on it a little bit more. She was talking about the tools and the data that this program made available. I think that's such an important point because so many people are getting their information online. And the truth is that independent journalists don't have a lot of great tools to track um, and analyze disinformation campaigns. And like I'm
Mhm.
often asked, what's the difference between misinformation and disinformation? And among our circles, like misinformation is just something you see that's potentially just kind of goofy and wrong, and you're like, haha, look at this, and you share it, and then later on you find out, oh, it's not true. Um, like the Pope wore a puffer jacket would be a
Right.
great example. Disinformation campaigns, on the other hand, are more organized. There's a lot of evidence of intentionality that the people spreading this information know that it's not true, and
Mhm.
usually they're trying to create a sense of chaos and insecurity among certain audiences. I mean, that's kind of one of the hallmarks of foreign disinformation campaigns. And if you have access to tools, and among the fact-checking organizations, one of the groups that's the best at this is Rappler in the Philippines. Like
Sure.
you can trace which actors and agents are spreading the disinformation and how they go about using certain tactics to amplify it.
Mm,
And it's very effective when you can show people, look, this is factually incorrect, and there's an intentional campaign behind it to spread it to try and fool you. But you need technical tools. Like CrowdTangle was one that fact checkers used for
hmm
years that was really helpful. And as a journalism community, not just fact checkers, but all of us, we're going backwards, I feel like. We're losing tools. We should be getting more technical ability and more adept at being able to understand the information landscape. And instead, things like CrowdTangle being retired, things like the fact-checking program being rolled back. It just feels like we're going backwards globally, and it's disheartening for the journalist. But the ultimate victim is the public. It's the public that needs accurate information. So
Yeah.
I just had to chime in there again.
Well, and it's to me, it's especially frightening that while um, fact checkers are losing tools, the tools that bad actors have available, especially with AI, seem to be ramping up and making it even easier for people to craft things that look believable and then, of course, get them out into the media ecosystem. Um,
Yeah, I would say we're seeing that AI is a real double-edged sword,
mm,
because there are also fact checkers who are using AI to create chat bots and to
mhm,
promote good information. So, um, I think none of our fact checkers are afraid of technology. We just want to see it be used to promote accurate, high quality information. But you're right, like the AI thing has like it's really brought these new the fake videos and just the whole way that people are turning to video more for news, and that now, and it used to be that you thought, oh, if you saw video of something that must mean it's real, and now with AI, well, maybe it's not.
mhm, mhm.
Another thing, I just wanted
Yeah.
to remind, like Jeff, you said this when you were here in Mongolia, and actually we started working with Meta when Jeff was here in 2022. One of the things that Jeff pointed out is people do not disseminate disinformation on purpose, so that not necessarily to have people trust in the falsehood, but basically to be unequip you from things that you can trust in. So we're not really talking, I don't think we're generally globally talking about this enough. Um, there are certain people who want people to have very low media literacy and not recognize this information. And even if they do, they still kind of fulfill their purpose because they know that they shouldn't trust some information that they're seeing. And that could include the good information as well. So, while doing fact checking, what we try to do in Mongolia, mostly under our Fact First Mongolia initiative, and you mentioned Rappler, we shamelessly copy Rappler in Mongolia. And so we established this Facts First Mongolia network, where we have a number of about actually 19, I think, organizations, media organizations who are working with us. And we're hoping to amplify our fact checking, as well as direct people to trustworthy sources. Um, so tools like the JTI, the Journalism Trust Initiative, and things like that could be a good way for us to identify who are the sources that we can trust. Of course, there's going to be like certain political biases and things like that, but do they affect their editorial policy and things like that could be identified, hopefully using tools like the JTI. I mean, I think it's especially in a country like Mongolia where news is not seen as vital, where news is seen as it's needed to be, it's supposed to be free and things like that. It is important to basically direct people to trustworthy sources and news channels. So rather than just relying on the social media platform's policy on fact checking, for instance,
Mhm.
they need to be going into sources that do their own fact checks, and I mean, have certain level of trust and confidence that they can trust this media organization, and if they have concerns, that they can address it with those organizations. So yeah, I think that was kind of an important thing that like when we're doing fact checking, we're mostly talking about one particular story, and then we add context onto that. And at the same time, some of our projects actually address the bigger ecosystem issue and how this disinformation campaigns are messing with people's heads and their long-term impact on their relationships with journalism. I think this needs to be also mentioned a lot, and I think that's why also the labeling mechanism, the connecting of the fact checks to the hoaxes in the platform is also very important.
Mm,
I think that trust issue is so critical, and it's why we have the code of principles. It's not because we're nitpickers and we want to establish a bunch of rules for journalists to follow. It's that so people can understand that there are standards of evidence and that these fact-checking organizations are following them and they're being held accountable. But I worry that because of a lack of media literacy, like people are losing a sense that when you make an assertion, a factual claim, you just say something that you need to be able to back it up with evidence, not just like, oh, well, I think so, or my gut tells me, or a friend, I heard it from a friend who heard it from their neighbor. I mean, uh, that's that's a big problem, and I worry about that issue as well among the audience. And I think we journalists, like talking about humility again, like we need to learn ways to talk about this in a way that we explain our methods in an everyday normal language. And I mean, I try my best at it. I'm not always great. I get into my fact checker mode, but we have to be able to explain in a way that meets people where they are about like what are standards of evidence and how do journalists use these and why can you rely on us? Because it's becoming more and more of a distinction between journalists and other kinds of very common online content that, we see these podcasters and interviewers who they're not equipped to fact check their guests. And so
yeah.
people can go on these podcasts and just say all kinds of things that aren't true. And there needs to be standards of evidence like the IFC and Code of Principles and the Journalism Trust Initiative, and we need to be able to explain it to people on a realistic basis.
Hmm. I've seen news stories about programs in other countries outside the United States, maybe some in the United States, that are in the school systems, really emphasizing information literacy, how to um, look for evidence, look for primary sources, look for attribution. Um, do you, Angie, is there some hope there, I guess, or are those efforts just too few and far between?
I think there's a lot of hope there. And one of the hopeful efforts is I think there's a growing realization of how necessary media literacy is. And people, when they go online now, they do have a sense of like, whoa, everything I see here might not
Mm,
be true. Um, I like to see the media literacy programs in the schools, and the ones that are very well done do try for lack of a better word, depolarize. That's not an everyday word that I just said we should be using. But the best media literacy programs try to turn down the temperature on the
mhm,
politics so that everybody can like think a little more conceptually about real or not.
mhm,
Um, and I think those programs have to help. Now, like one thing I'm always reminding people, and especially like students and people who are younger than me, um, like we didn't always have this thing called the internet, and it's still really new technology in a lot of ways. And so you think pre-internet, there were a lot of systems and norms and just like the way we did things that would promote accurate information. and had the tendency to suppress inaccurate information. So, like publishers would vet material, and it was an effort and costly to print things. Well, that's no longer true on the internet. So we really are working out, how do we establish systems and shortcuts so that like we know what's true and what's not. And that's what we're really in the process of working out and what media literacy is working toward. But because the technology is so powerful and relatively new, like I feel like we're still very much in the midst of of of, of dealing with this. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah. And just to give you a sense of it, it's like my first newsroom. We were not using typewriters. I'm not quite that old, but like we were writing stories on a computer and saving it to a disk, and then I'd eject the disk and I'd carry it over to my editor. I mean, like that's how new we're talking about. And I remember the day when they brought a new, we were all working on Macs and they brought a PC in and they said, "Oh, this new PC is our internet machine." And like,
Mm.
so we had one internet computer where we would get over. I know, and this makes me sound ancient, but I'm saying like this is in my lifetime. Like that's how new this technology is. And we
Mhm.
desperately, as an information community, we need to work out the way we want to deal with this technology so that we know what's true and what's not.
Yep. I was the nerd in the corner at the Austin American Statesman newspaper when we had our one and only internet machine. And, people were told, oh, if you want to find something online, go ask Jeff. He'll look it up for you. And of course, that system has now fortunately been democratized. So everyone is now expected to have their own access and skills to get information as that should have been. But of course, at the time, all these things were new. And when the internet, first emerged, um, it was considered to be, of course, a big breakthrough in providing information, access to information, truthful information, and fostering democracy. And now we've seen, not that it's not that, but of course that there are some dark sides um, that uh, haven't that have uh, disrupted that vision. Um, let's see, Doya, how do you assess um, the effectiveness of fact checking? Do you see um, uh, with fact checking, have you seen a decrease in false information online, or what do you look for to see whether the fact checks have been effective?
So there would be a number of things, but one thing I can say is we haven't seen a decrease in false information online, but definitely we're seeing them. So basically, we look at it in this way. So we said on the toxicity analysis, 16% are more misinformation type, and the 84% is more dis and malinformation type. And many of the remaining, those 84% is a coordinated information campaigns.
Hmm.
Whether it's to try to have you trust in something, or whether it's to have you trust in nothing, or whether it's to distract you from important things that are happening. For instance, when there's the protest that's happening at the Central Square, um, you somehow there's somebody has a celebrity gossip that somebody breaks up and then they come back together and then everybody goes there instead of looking at what the protest is happening. So these are the main things that we see, and these things are not done by like an individual person, individual social media user that's just using their own Facebook, but mostly by coordinated accounts and farms. It's like a paid industry, as in a lot of Southeast Asian countries as well. So we see them innovating. So that's how we know our fact checks are effective. So, for instance, because the
Mhm.
fact-checking tool basically matches similar false claims and labels them, they have been first in like their Innovation 1.0, they were like changing their hat labels headers of their titles of their false stories, like adding a dot in the middle or like a dash in the middle, so or using different caps letters so that hoping it won't be caught by the algorithm and things like that. One of the things that we see is like when you rate content on certain disinformation like channels such as pages that normally do that, the overall performance of the page or Facebook page or group or account is actually less. So there have been a number of very active channels that take part or even lead those coordinated information campaigns that have been affected by our fact checks multiple times. And then they don't really show up on the queue anymore as often. And then we think like, aren't they operating anymore? And then we go back and see they're still posting stuff. They're still posting harmful stuff, but
Mhm.
they're not, those pages are not anymore the main characters in those campaigns anymore. And then they start new pages or purchase new pages. So at least I don't know how politically correct that would be to say this, but basically, in the short term, we are being able to, through the fact checks, uh, disconnect certain audience from certain disinformation disseminators. And then we're basically giving the guys who do the bad thing more
Mhm.
work to do. They need to, they're having to innovate. But the sad part is we're not really fast enough to catch up with their innovation as well, because they have a certain interest that they need to serve to, and then they have the necessary resources that are given to them. So all their time is being spent on just doing that, right? Coming up with new ways to mess up with people's heads.
Right.
And while we have to study how they're doing that, how they are changing, we're also chasing after them to clear up the mess that they have already created. And it's never going to be enough for a just fact checkers to clean everything up. Um, and we're also have to like as an NGO, we also have to take care of all our admin stuff. We're not like given resources as they are, right? So it's a tricky game, and it also makes the media and information literacy training and education even more important, so that we can probably attack this from two sides. The ones that are doing the reactive stuff, and then the media and information literacy can be the more proactive, the prevention side of things. And in Mongolia, unfortunately, we don't have much state attention or investment into the media and information literacy side. There are programs being added, but it's very slow in the education system. And at the same time, as more people are media and information literacy literate, then that means they would have to innovate more to trick those people
Mm.
into thinking what they want them to think, right? So I guess that's also kind of a political way, political reason that's playing into the whole ecosystem.
Interesting. I found it especially insightful your comment that people who spread these falsehoods, their goal is not necessarily to make you believe the falsehood, but it's to make you disbelieve everything, whether it's
Mm,
true or not. And I thought that was, I guess that really emphasizes the importance of having fact checkers, because um, to live in a world where people discount everything is pretty frightening.
yeah. Yeah.
We are nearing the end of our program, and I have one last question. It's a tradition on these talks that we ask this. And the question is, what does press freedom mean to you? Angie, can you go first, please?
Sure. To me, press freedom means the freedom to be able to follow your own curiosity and investigate whether things are true or not without being afraid of consequences or inhibitions or punishment. It really is about freedom of intellectual inquiry and freedom of expression. There's so many aspects of press freedom that I treasure, like keeping public officials accountable, serving the public, enabling democracy. But really, at base, it's that freedom to learn and grow is so important to me, and that freedom to pursue your curiosity. So that's my answer in brief.
That's cool. Um, Doya, how about you? What does press freedom mean to you?
I answered this question 2 years ago, and I don't remember what my answer was back then, but I think it's going to be different because right now Mongolia is discussing its press freedom law. It's more of a law regulating the media industry rather than the freedom law. It ultimately becomes more important to us now to understand press freedom. And I think press freedom is actually just freedom to know, right to know for everybody, not just journalists and media. It's an equalizer between the general public and the ones who have power. I mean, with this social media coming in, I mean, I personally pondered like, what if we took out the press side that's between policymakers and the general public? And technically speaking, you can directly just connect public with the officials, and then
Mm.
there's this information flow that can happen. But what about the quality of the information? What about interests that play into and corrupt the type of information that's being flown between those two? So press freedom is the thing that keeps this flow of information clean and accurate and trustworthy. So, yeah, that would be it. Press freedom would be an equalizer.
Yeah, interesting. Well, that concludes our discussion. I want to thank Angie and Doya for joining us and sharing their thoughts and expertise. And I'd like to encourage our viewers to join the Society of Professional Journalists if you aren't already members. SPJ is the most broad-based journalism organization in the United States, and it's dedicated to encouraging the free practice of journalism and stimulating high standards of ethical behavior. If you want to be kept up to date on future SPJ International Community Talks, such as this one, subscribe to the group's weekly and short Substack newsletter. Dan has posted the link for that, or you can search for the SPJ International Community on Substack. So thank you again for joining us, and that concludes the program.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks, everybody.